In the redesigned process, the purchasing department, upon receiving a request for a purchase, will record the details of the purchase order in a shared database that will be accessible in different parts of the organization that were involved in this process. They will still send a purchase order to the vendor as required by the vendor to trigger their corresponding order to cash process. The vendor will then deliver the goods at the receiving department. And here came the most fundamental change of them all. A clerk at the receiving department, upon inspecting the goods, will determine which purchase order or which outstanding purchase order these goods correspond to, and will retrieve them directly to the database where the purchase orders had been stored by the purchasing department. And the principle was introduced that if the corresponding purchase order could not be found, the goods will simply not be accepted. Therefore, instituting a culture in the vendors of bringing, for example, a copy of the purchase order upon a delivery, so that it could be guaranteed that the corresponding purchase order will be found and that it would then be marked as delivered. Why this is important? Because then all the other accounts payable had to do was to retrieve which purchase orders had been delivered but not yet paid, and would then just trigger payments for all these purchase orders. Interestingly, accounts payable in this context will trigger payments even in the case where they had not yet received an invoice. This is a practice called evaluated receipts settlement nowadays. Evaluated receipts settlement has the characteristic that payments are made without there necessarily being a presentation of the invoice. In subsequent modifications of the evaluated receipts settlement process, the idea was then introduced to have the accounts payable department request an invoice from the vendor, so that the invoices that arrive to the accounts payable department are those that in essence have already been verified and where the payment had been agreed. And by having an invoice, we can fulfill certain regulatory requirements in regards to invoicing processes. The result of this redesign at Ford was a 75 reduction in headcount, making it more comparable to the Mazda case. In addition to this direct benefit, which was actually the main intention, there were some side benefits. The fact that there was a simpler process for controlling the materials, as we had a shared databases where we could see all the outstanding purchase orders, what has been ordered, what has not yet been ordered. More accurate financial information, as we are not storing purchase orders or invoices that do not match with each other. Everything when it's stored matched. And faster purchase requisition times were achieved because we were not wasting time trying to detect defects that had occurred and had not been detected at the time that they had occurred. It is a general principle that when a defect occurs, it is easier to correct it when immediately after it occurs than trying to find it out, several days or several weeks later. And finally, because the speed was improved, then there were less cases of overdue payments for which Ford was paying some penalties to its suppliers. One of the main lessons learned from this can be summarized by the question, why should we automate something that we do not need to do? We better redesign first our process so that only those things that actually need to be done are there, and then automation becomes incredibly more effective. Thus, the importance of redesign before automation. Thinking about redesigning the structure of the process before we actually throw in technology at it. And that what motivated the title of the article in Harvard Business Reviews that popularized this approach, which was titled "Don't Automate, Obliterate."